a reimagined and remixed version of the Beatles' Red and Blue albums from 1973 just released. But luckily, I got my hands on a couple vinyl editions of them earlier this week, which means I got to do something I've never gotten to do before, which is form my own opinion before someone tells me what to think about these. First off, why do these exist? Well, when the Beatles were first releasing music, mono was still the main way that music was mixed. There were stereo audio sets and there were stereo albums, but mono was the primary way that most people listened to music, and so the Beatles would focus on the mono mixes all the way through Sgt. Pepper. It wasn't until the White Album that they would start focusing on stereo mixes as well, and in fact switch over entirely to stereo mixes for their last two albums afterwards. Because the Beatles were mainly focused on the mono mix of a song, they didn't tend to be there for the stereo mixings of the songs, and this was still when it was pretty early in songs being mixed in stereo, so a lot of weird choices were often made, and with the Beatles music, sometimes different takes were used. For example, in one of the harmonies of the song If I Fell from A Hard Day's Night, you can hear Paul's voice crack in the stereo version. In the mono version, it's not there, it's a different take. Or John's voice in Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds on Sgt. Pepper is different on the stereo version than it is on the mono version. Also, the song She's Leaving Home is at a different tape speed on Sgt. Pepper's stereo version than on the mono version. Because early stereo mixing didn't have the decades of practice that we have now, a lot of weird choices would be made. There was a lot of excitement around being able to hear the vocals a lot better when they're not muddled with the rest of the instruments like they can sometimes be in mono. And so sometimes in songs, they would take the vocals and move it to one side of the entire mix and take the rest of the instruments and move it to the other side. And when you listen to this in headphones, it's a very dizzying experience. But a lot of the times this was just for a stereo setup and people didn't really know how else to do this. Or if they did, those people were not in the room. Nowadays, it's pretty common to have most of the drums and the bass guitar in the center along with the vocals, and then have other pianos or synths or stuff, guitars even, just in the side so that it can kind of widen the stereo image, but you're still grounded in the most concrete parts of the song. But the old stereo versions of Beatles songs sound like you're looking at what I just described sideways. It feels like you're looking at the drums, the bass guitar, the pianos, and the vocals all spread out on this one image, where it's super, super disorienting to listen to. Here's a demonstration of what I mean by that.
This is what it sounds like when you mix it today. This is what it used to sound like yesterday.
We now live in a world of stereo music, and so when the Beatles music was moved to streaming services, all of the stereo mixes are what was moved. And that's what leads us to where we are now, with a bunch of stereo mixes that sound super disorienting on streaming services, and the mono versions being relegated mostly to the CD 2014 mono set or just the old vinyls. In 2017, Giles Martin began the now annual tradition of going back to these albums and remixing the stereo to sound a lot more modern. This started with Sgt. Pepper and then has gone on chronologically until last year when they jumped back in time to Revolver, and seemingly we're going to start moving backwards in time from there, which instead of doing that, we now have the Red and Blue albums. These later stereo mixes from Sgt. Pepper on were all made possible by the fact that Giles Martin had access to the original tapes of all of these sessions, and so he could go back in, take the guitar, take the bass, take the drums, and restructure it in a much more modern soundscape. However, when it came to Revolver or any of the songs before that, there was an issue. You see, these songs were all recorded on 4-track tape, and some even on 2-track tape. This meant that there were only 4 tracks for the entire song to be recorded on. Oftentimes, what the Beatles would do to get around that limitation is record the drums on one track, a bass guitar on another, a guitar on another, and then that last 4th track would be used to record those original 3 down into one now melded track. So the bass, the drums, and the guitar are now all on this track, and they can clear up these original 3 to record more things on top of it, more vocals, double takes for the vocals, anything like that, so they can kind of fill out the song a little bit more. But it does lead to the issue we've run into now, where these original tapes are wiped and we only have the melted together version of that part of the song. And so we can't really take the drums, guitar, and bass guitar away from each other because they're all together in this one audio file that we don't have a way to decipher it. Or at least we didn't have a way to decipher it, because now, as of a couple of years ago with Peter Jackson's Get Back films, we have MAL, Machine Assisted Learning, a system named after roadie and friend of the Beatles, Mal Evans, and it is just a program that is designed to learn what the Beatles sound like and what all of their instruments sound like, and then just be able to take them apart. So we can now go in with that software and separate those melted together tracks so that we have access to all of the original guitar, bass drum, whatever it is, instrument tracks. And we can now go through and mix it all together in a modern soundscape. Now that we're all caught up, what do I think of these mixes on the Red and Blue albums? I'm going to cut to the chase. I love these mixes. I'm immediately switching to these as the main way I listen to most any of these songs. They absolutely floored me. They're amazing. They're exactly what we want these to sound like. And it's super refreshing to be able to hear these songs as kind of the actual full song and not just have to like squint to get a good idea of what the song should sound like. Especially if you're someone that doesn't have access to any of the mono versions of these songs, this is going to make getting into the earlier stuff a lot easier because you're not going to get headaches trying to balance your head with headphones on. As is the case with most of these new mixes, the bass and drums are a lot more full, I would say, in sound, and this really helps, I think. It makes it sound a lot less just trebly in these earlier songs, and you feel like the whole band is there, which is super exciting. I feel like it makes a lot of these songs come to life. One thing that I really love about all of these early mixes is I feel like Giles was being very intentional in keeping the sound of these early 60s stereo mixes by still making it so that some of the instruments sound like they're pretty much all the way to the right or pretty much all the way to the left, but there's still the drums, bass guitar, and vocals, for the most part, dead center in songs, so that it doesn't feel like you're being pulled one way or another, but you still have kind of the charm of like an early stereo mix. My favorite part of these new mixes so far is definitely the fact that there's just so many things in these songs that I've heard a billion times that I did not know were there before. I'm being able to hear rhythm guitar parts that are like integral to the groove of the song that I just wouldn't have been able to tell you were there at all before. For instance, there's a rhythm guitar part in the verses of From Me to You that make the song like way better in my opinion, and I had no idea that it was there. It was there. I've now gone back to listen to earlier mixes and you can tell that it's there, but this just really like lets it function as part of the song, and it's not something that you are, like I said before, kind of like squinting to imagine you can see. One of the standout tracks from these new mixes is definitely the new I Am The Walrus stereo mix, because it doesn't just halfway through the song switch to only one ear and you again don't get like dizzy trying to keep up with it. This is, of course, like one of the Beatles' quintessential psychedelic songs, and you know that when you listen to earlier versions of it, but you feel it, I think, in this song. I actually am like experiencing the fun stereo effects that are going on as opposed to just hearing the psychedelic sounds and picturing a psychedelic experience. It really, like, you're moving around the whole time in it, especially the second half and the outro of the song. I didn't know there was a rhythm guitar going along in the Magical Mystery Tour chorus, and now I do. It's clearly there. The bongos in A Hard Day's Night are so much fun, and I think really add to the track the way they're mixed in right now. Love that version. Hey Bulldog, I think, is very much enhanced by this mix. You finally get the vocals in the center, and you can hear the exchange between Paul and John at the end a lot more clear. In fact, the first barking noise from Paul sounds like he's in the room. It scared me both times I listened to it with headphones. I genuinely had to jolt and make sure no one was in the room with me. I think most of my favorites from this are the mixes from Rubber Soul, especially Girl and Norwegian Wood. These are two songs I already loved before, but I think they sound absolutely fantastic in this mix. The stereo spread of Norwegian Wood is very early 60s stereo spread, but it sounds way more grounded and is a lot more fun to listen to. I think that the bass in it shines a lot better, but doesn't overpower anything. I don't even remember thinking about the bass in this song before, but I think the way it's mixed now makes it sound really nice and kind of adds to the song. Similar to Paul's yawn in the new mix from I'm Only Sleeping, you now can't miss what the Beatles were singing in the back of Girl. A point of discussion that's come up with these new versions of the albums is that they've added new songs to each of the Red and Blue albums, about like 9 or so each. I don't think people have really taken issue with the songs that they've added to these collections, but more so how they added them in. For example, on the CD and streaming versions of these albums, they've been added in chronologically. And on the vinyl version, they've been added as kind of a extra third record. So I'm holding the Blue album right here. Instead of it being mixed in, we have side 5 and side 6, which are all of the extra songs. My opinion on this is that I think it's hilarious and I love it because it's pretty much like the modern equivalent of like a Hey Jude album where the songs are kind of jumping all over the place. And I think it's really fun. Oops, I bumped the mic. I think it's really fun. It's a compilation album, and I think if I were to be walking through a store and found an album that starts with Now and Then goes to Blackbird, and at some point goes to Hey Bulldog, and ends with I Want You, She's So Heavy, I'd buy it immediately, just to have it. Just to say I have the album that does that. I think that's really funny. My final thoughts on the new Red and Blue albums are I love them. I love the new mixes. I think the extra vinyl is really funny and also really fun. I've been listening to them all this last week. I didn't really use the old Red and Blue album versions that I had. I'd much rather just go to the album for the songs that I was listening to. But these compilations I think are a lot more fun, and I really like the new mixes of the songs, so I will definitely be using these, especially because I can't wait to hear what the rest of the Beatles albums that haven't been remixed sound like, and we only really have this as a teaser for it over the next 6 years of our lives. So while we wait, I'm glad we have these. Speaking of Giles Martin, he's been cited before in interviews talking about these remixes, saying he hopes people listen to the music and not the mixes. He knows people are going to listen to the mixes, but he hopes that it's kind of like a vessel for the music to be heard. And I think that's exactly what happened to me while I was trying to prepare for this video. I was trying to take notes of comparisons on these mixes, and all of a sudden the song would be over because I was just so swept away in the song that I didn't really have as much notes as I was hoping to have. And I think that's kind of the point. I think it's super cool that that's the experience that I had, especially when I was going in trying to do like A and B comparisons and would just get too caught up in the song. I think he nailed it. I think the mixes make it so that the song really sweeps you away. And I love it. I think it brings a lot of life to these earlier songs, to the later songs. And I just think it's a really fun project that we get to have. I'm editing the video together right now, and I realized I forgot to give a little shout out to my favorite liner note, which is from John Harris. At the end of the Blue Album liner note, he said, "The magic at work is as powerful as ever, and it links everything together, past, present, and future, yesterday and today, now and then." You nailed it. That was perfect. All right, in summary, Giles Martin is a legend. The Beatles existed only so Paul McCartney could learn the knowledge he needed to make the song Coming Up, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching this video. And before you go,